From Los Angeles, this is the Adult Swim podcast, Rick and Morty Companion Edition. I'm Matt Harrigan. We're talking about Rick and Morty number 405, Rattlestar Ricklactica. We're going to hear from the people who made this episode, starting with director Jacob Hare, along with writer James Siciliano, music composer Ryan Elder, art director James Mcdermott, lead background designer Robbie Irwin, dialogue editor Nick Rachinsky, and character designer Carrie Capella. You'll hear my guests referring to Snakes, which was the working title of this episode. If you haven't watched it yet, you might want to watch it first. Here we go with Rick and Morty number 405, formerly Snakes, now Rattlestar Ricklactica.
My name's Jacob Hare, and I'm an animation director on season 4 and 5 of Rick and Morty. I moved out here to work on low-budget indie horror movies and makeup effects back when there was still a DVD market, and you could, kind of survive doing that stuff. I discovered that I should have probably started testing for animation a lot earlier. There was a lot of struggling and freelancing before I found out, that you can take a test and get hired to animation. So since 2006, I've been working in animation. Started as a storyboard artist, then assistant directing, and then this is the second show that I've directed on.
Did you feel like you had to study old shows to come into this, or do you feel like you just came in with a fresh perspective?
I was a fan of the show. I had watched all of them, and when I knew that I was coming here to work, I kind of really started studying the previous shows, because there is canon to this show. It's not just sort of episodic where it resets every week, and you do need to know things about the characters.
What are some examples of that?
Making sure that you're not overly cartoonish in your Rick acting, like keeping Wes reminds us sometimes he's an old man, he's a crotchety old man. He's as animators, sometimes we get very flourishy at the wrong places, and keeping tabs also on Morty. It's funny, like all of us tend to sometimes draw Morty with concerned eyebrows. I don't know if it's just the Mr. Bill of him or the oh no aspect of his personality, but It's just sort of about seeing what came before and making sure you don't do anything that steps on it or steps on something, crosses a line that's already been established.
Let's walk through Snakes. So Jerry hanging the lights.
The gravity shoes, it's very hard to do.
Yeah.
And Bardell did a great job with the zero gravity. Is
Bardell,
hard.
the animation company.
Yes. Uh-huh. When things move slowly in animation, that equates to more drawings. And typically, when something moves fast, it's less drawings. So it's counterintuitive to what you would expect, but it's hard to do to sell zero gravity. And I think they did a great job. Yeah, and Snakes, I would be curious to ask the writers, actually. I haven't had the chance to. The Ouroboros, I think it's called, the image of the snake eating its own tail. I would love to know if that was something that they had in advance, or if something they came across, like, hey, we just happened to be writing a time travel story about snakes, and we came across this perfect image of the paradox of time travel stories where, the infinity and paradox are summed up in a single image of the snake eating its own tail. I thought that was a brilliant way to take a silly episode and kind of weirdly, put something at the end that really capped it for me.
Funny, stupid stuff done really intelligently.
I have worked in children's animation and on a couple other sci-fi shows where we're constantly doing time travel stories. I don't love time travel stories. I like when they're silly, like Bill and Ted, but I don't love like time travel because you run into the same paradoxes, the same problems every single time. And I came to Rick and Morty knowing that they don't do time travel, and instantly one of my first shows is a time travel story. But the fact that it's Rick just fucking on time travel stories the whole time, I loved. I mean, the fact that he's just trash talking it, because it's not something that he does. He consistently says he's not a time travel guy, or, it's something that's always been on the shelf in his garage, but it's something that he hasn't done up until this point.
A show featuring mostly snakes. What's that like, directing something like that?
Well, the great thing was that I turned the board artist loose, and what they turned back into me was elevated the material right away. So that was nice to not have to really go deep in. The one thing about it was balancing. At first you have 4 animators drawing a show, and they could easily become Lion King type snakes with a lot of eyebrow expression and a lot of but no, I think the concept that we got right away and we tacked down and we stuck to was that this is just as if real snakes from the Rick and Morty world suddenly just had their own world. They're not really emoting a lot, or we didn't want to give them too much whimsical sort of attributes. It's mostly the broad strokes of what they're doing that, and it's so funny. But yeah, we got audio track of just hisses that we then had to kind of work off of, which was, I've never done anything like it. I doubt I ever will again.
Yeah. Well, you direct this show like a drama, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a drama.
Yeah.
That's what makes it funny?
Yeah. The interesting thing was I inherited this episode. Originally, I think Anthony Chun was going to do it, but then a schedule change happened. He went over to Solar Opposites, the other show here, and I ended up getting this show with the new marching orders that the snakes weren't going to speak. There was a previous draft of this where the snakes were given dialogue.
Yeah.
And having that advanced information did help to know what the story kind of was. It's this sort of astronaut's wife tale of this thing went to space and came back not what it seems. And so, but the scenes that they beat by beat wrote in the script really described what the story was. And it didn't take a lot of effort. There wasn't a lot of moments where they were like, just go nuts with this one.
So the dialogue sort of choreographed the direction, but then the dialogue went away.
Yeah, not entirely. I mean, I had happened to have read that script, but it didn't stay exactly the same either, the beats of what happens. But just knowing kind of the intent behind it before going in was helpful for me. But then you get into the stuff, Kyung-Yi Lim, our one who was boarding at the time, she did that snake sex sequence, and she had to reference YouTube videos of snakes having sex, and it came back like as you see it now. I mean, it was excellent, and the nuances of the snake seducing him and kind of taking control of him all played so well. It was it was a combination of just the team knocking it out of the park and us getting lucky in some cases.
The show is as funny when no one's talking. Right?
Yeah, and it's so absurd to just see this entire sequence pantomimed with snakes, and also figuring out all the things of how did the snakes hold coffee mugs? How did their tails?
Right.
At what we knew we were going to have 4 races of snake, and making sure that you didn't have a rattler in there that interfered with any action, snake casting, so to speak, for the scenes. It was there was a lot to do after we had boarded the broad strokes of it in designing it.
You had some adult decisions to make about snakes.
Yeah. And I think that the end sequence too, where they return home and there's just a battle going on the lawn, was very challenging. I tried really hard to color code the storyboard and make suggestions about what snakes can be reused where and stuff, but I think all that just landed like a rock on the design department. They had to deal with it after the storyboard. So,
do you bring your horror movie experience to this job?
Absolutely.
You do.
That's one of the reasons I wanted to work on this show. It has the sci-fi horror aspect to it, and I think that when you go too far and do something insanely grotesque, they love that.
Do you look at horror movie directors? Who do you admire? Who do you look at?
I'm a huge fan of Stuart Gordon, who actually comes from stage plays, who did like Reanimator and stuff like that. I love the Raimi stuff, Sam Raimi, John Carpenter, all the classics. And then there's early Peter Jackson even was great for how insane and explosive it was and how cartoonish it was. I always liked the cartoonish, splattery sort of horror, as I gravitated towards that more than, I think it was the animator sensibilities more than the stuff that took itself too seriously. Trying to come up with the gore sequences with him fighting the reptiles, I was leaning on some of that early Peter Jackson stuff. How can you kill someone that's not just stabbing them, or simply, how can you, and what comes to mind is the way he uses the cable wrapped around the one in order to sort of strip its body apart. You're always looking for the next level cartoonish kill gags, as they call them in the horror world. And I think that in Snakes too, there's the Terminator sequence in Snakes was something that is almost shot for shot from the Doomsday sequence from Terminator 2. And I don't always love when shows parody stuff shot for shot, but the fact that it's snakes is so next level. It's so different from a parody of Terminator than anything else I've seen.
Do you put in references that are personal to you?
In Snakes specifically, there was a beat where we overturned the on the shelf, the time travel stuff on the shelf in Rick's garage when they get attacked. We had it overturned in the sense that time travel's always been on the shelf. We just kind of like thought it would be funny if that got knocked over in this one where we're finally breaching time travel in the episode. That was just like a gag that the designers and I threw in there. But yeah, no, I typically don't. This is off topic, but on American Dad one time, I designed an entire city street after a city street in my hometown. But the names of the bars were parodies of the bars in my hometown, but a couple of them came dangerously close to being exactly the names of the bars. And I think it went right into the show. It got designed and went right on TV, and it got noticed. And I stray away from like putting people I know in shows anymore, or trying any hijinks with like, haha, I'm going to laugh at this, but nobody else will know what it is because it's bit me in the ass before.
There's an immortality to animation that you can't hide from.
Yeah, I don't know why I just brought that up. It might revive the interest in it.
Hi, I am James Siciliano. I'm a writer on Rick and Morty for Season 4 and Season 5 as well. I went to Syracuse University, came out here right after college. I've been out here for, 13 and a half years or something. Did the PA thing for a while, then I wound up at South Park for like 7.5 years.
Wow.
They were good to me there. And I worked on the digital team, which is basically like we promoted the show. We ran the website, we wrote books, and did really cool video games. And I got a really cool opportunity to come over through Mike McMahon, who's amazing. Who was a showrunner on Season 4, but a supervising producer on Season 3. And he had me come over and gave me a chance to do that writer's assistant job, which was an amazing opportunity, and just, was a huge fan of the show before I came here. So
as a writer's assistant, you sit and you listen to all the writers pitch their jokes and decide amongst themselves how it moves forward.
Sure.
And you probably learn when to open your mouth and when not to.
Yeah, you do.
You
do, yeah. It's always better to listen in the beginning, especially get a feel for the room and when is a good time to pitch. And they're really good and generous in this room. Whenever we got to write alts, like alt jokes, Harmon sometimes will do a pass and he'll put question marks in to try and beat the joke. They're really good. You could always submit your own stuff. As long as you're doing your work, you could always throw your hat in the ring when you're pitching and stuff like that. So yeah, you learn pretty quick when you can pitch jokes, throw ideas in. You don't want to step on other writers.
Yeah.
And it's great, though. I got some stuff in, yeah.
You got some stuff in as a writer's assistant.
Yeah, and I wound up getting to co-write Morty's Mind Blowers for Season 3, which was a really cool collaborative process. Crazy, but exciting.
Yeah.
So it was a really great opportunity for me, and also just in general to learn story structure from Harmon. It's unbelievable how he can break a story down, and the process of that was just such an incredible learning experience for me. And Justin and Dan were both in the room all the time for Season 3. It was really great.
So here you are in Season 4.
Season 4, yeah.
You're a writer now.
Writer in Season 4, and Season 5 as well. It's crazy. Yeah, Season 4 is pretty much in the past at this point.
Yeah.
Almost.
Tell us about snakes.
Space snakes. Oh my
Yes.
God. Buckle up.
Tell us the genesis of this episode.
Well, the basic idea actually came in Season 3. This was an idea that we giggled about, we laughed about a lot in Season 3, which was basically the idea of, what if Morty got bit by a space snake? Like, what if while changing a tire in space, it was always that specific, while changing a tire in space, Rick told Morty to stay in the car, Morty didn't listen, and he got bit by a space snake. And I think it was the visualization of a snake. You can't see me, but I'm writhing my hand in the air. The visualization of a snake slithering in space, and we spent an hour or two discussing whether there should be a fang as an attachment outside of a space helmet, or whether the fangs came through the space, like the spacesuit, which wasn't a waste of time. But
were you happy where it landed?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that episode I'm so excited for. So that was the basic idea, and we couldn't quite crack it in season 3 because it was always like, okay, he gets bit in space, so what? They go back to the planet, like, does Morty become a snake? Who it was about the who cares of it, like, well, how do we get invested in this story? And we couldn't quite crack it. And then in season 4, we were talking about it again, and the idea that kind of broke it back open was like, what if this snake was the Neil Armstrong or the Amelia Earhart for the species? And it was like, what if this was like the first snake that got into space, not just a space snake, and Morty killed it? Like, how devastating would that be to a society? What if Neil Armstrong never came back? What would that have done to us as a country and as a society, as a world? It would have broken our spirits a little bit, and who knows? I mean, that stuff like that, when you think back on history, it's crazy to say, like, what if this went differently? And what if Morty caused that for an entire planet?
Wow.
And that was kind of where things just kind of picked up, and the excitement really, snowballed after that, because we're like, well, it's so dumb. I mean, it's so dumb that, okay, Morty would maybe steal Rick's ship, send a living snake back from Earth to just be like, okay, your mission was a success. But then what would happen when an imposter snake came back? And
a lot of different ways to go.
Well, of course, time travel really is the only way to go. So yeah, that was kind of the genesis, and then what kind of broke it open for us. We pitched hundreds, thousands of ideas every season. Both like, what if this was an idea, and then obviously building off of other ideas, combining ideas. And it's just, it can be tiring, and it can be exhilarating and very funny.
And you bank them, some of them? You abandon others?
Abandon a lot.
Uh-huh.
A lot. There's no bad ideas, but a lot of ideas get flushed down the toilet. But yeah, I mean, we try our best to save the best ideas, bank them. I'll put that in quotes. Like, a lot of times stuff will just not be able to be broken. Like, we'll try to do a story circle for things repeatedly, and sometimes they just don't work out, and those ideas can either die or they can just go away, and then next season you're like, oh wait, what about this idea? Would that fit here? Which happens a lot.
A lot of people are very interested in the story circle.
Sure.
So how does that apply to the script? Like, can you break it down?
Oh boy, putting me on the spot. Yeah, I mean, your cold open, which is that Rick and Morty are in space. Rick says, listen to me, don't go into space. Morty doesn't listen. He gets bit by a space snake. So usually your cold open is the first beat, and then the second beat on an A story is the call to adventure, which is they go to the planet and they see that, oh man, Morty really destroyed this planet by what he did, destroyed this planet, and not fixing it, which would be like the call to adventure, means that this society will crumble. So that's your call to adventure. The threshold is the third beat. That would be Morty deciding to kind of go from order to chaos, which is taking a living snake from Earth and throwing it back onto Snake World. And we actually kind of break the format of this show by staying with the snakes, which
yeah,
it's a pretty crazy episode.
Yeah.
So Harmon kept saying he wanted people to feel like their TV was broken on this one. That we're just like, if someone was watching from the other room and they heard snake hissing, they'd be like, "What the fuck are you watching?" And I think we succeeded. So that's definitely a threshold. Usually on our show, thresholds are a big change where we go from order to chaos, or from like, you're really like going full into a different world. I'll put that in quotes. And this is literally going into Snake World. It's both Morty crossing an emotional threshold to fix the problem, again in quotes. I really should stop doing air quotes because nobody can fucking see them.
We'll add a sound effect.
And thank you. Preferably a fart. And so Morty crosses that threshold, and the snakes are thrown into a different world by the arrival of a fake snake, an imposter snake. Road of Trials for that. Basically, I mean, we kind of stay with Snake World, so it's kind of a weird thing. This is a really hard one because we go with time cops in this one. I mean, the second act is kind of all over the place. So I don't know if this is a good story circle episode.
But the circle itself it's very important to all the episodes in one way or another.
Oh my God, yeah. We always start there. We always start with the structure. And I'll just breeze through the second act because it's basically like the atonement is they go back after we see the Terminator thing. They go back and they see that this is really complicated. Rick and Morty are fighting, and then there's like the return threshold, which is usually our big action sequence. Sometimes we call it a duckbill or whatever. It's usually the fight and whatnot, and this is them fighting literally through the snake capital. And then things just go crazy for the end with we call it Master of Both Worlds, but that's just, I mean, there's so much stuff that happens at this. We go back for snake time travel bits, and we see time cops again, which Sleamy Pants and stuff. It's amazing.
It's a dense episode.
This is not a story circle breakdown episode, but it's a really cool your TV is broken kind of episode. And we do that's the funnest thing to do, is to take the circle and break it sometimes.
Yeah.
So
what was the evolution of it after so you wrote the first draft of the script, you bring it to the room?
Yes. Yeah.
And
first
then
draft.
Everybody, you beat up on it for a couple weeks?
Yeah. Every script is different, but always writers will do the first writer's draft and then usually a few drafts afterwards. So this one wrote the writer's draft, and then I think maybe 2 more revisions. Usually Harmon will we'll all do a table read, and then Harmon will give feedback based on like what's working, what's not, like what emotional arcs are working, like what are we feeling, how should this change. Then you go back with those notes, you do another pass, and then that can happen over and over again or whatever. I forget how many drafts I did. I think I did 3 before Harmon actually did. He went through and did like a Harmon pass before it went to production. So it really is collaborative in a lot of senses, and hopefully Harmon can do a little bit of magic at the end there too to make it even better. So that's to launch to production. There's multiple tiers, which is why things take so long in animation. It's like we do that first draft, which is usually has 3, 4, 5 passes on it before it goes to production. Then our amazing artists always elevate the work, and we get a thumbnail version, which is like looser drawings, like animatic is more cleaned up. So we get the thumbnails back, and then there's usually a notes pass on that, both for art, staging, etc., but also definitely script. So we'll do some rewrites based on that, and then we'll get the animatics back, which is cleaned up, and then they'll try and do, we'll do another pass. Hopefully it gets less and less and less as you get farther up the pipeline.
Have you seen this episode at its completion?
I actually still haven't. I haven't seen the final version. I saw mostly a final version, but I have not seen the final.
What stands out to you? that your ideas have come to life? What pops?
Oh my God. Well, there's a
lot
lot.
to pop.
Snake Jazz I'm excited about. I haven't heard the final version of Snake
okay.
Jazz yet, but I'm excited about the idea of it. And
I did see in your script you spelled out what the Snake Jazz would sound like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's it's funny because my wife, I had told her that I was putting I was putting Snake Jazz in, and she's like, well, what does it sound like? And I hadn't even thought about it at that moment. I just was writing a dumb joke, and I was like, well, I guess it's just mostly hi-hat. And I did it. And that was the end of that. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah. You never know.
Here's music composer Ryan Elder.
Snakes, there has two really interesting things about it musically. The first one is there's large chunks of time in the episode where there's no music, and that's very intentional. These scenes where the audio is literally just snakes hissing for like 8 minutes straight was a request from Dan. He wanted this scene to have no music, to get in the way, nothing to get in the way of these snakes just hissing at each other, because the idea of putting a show on television where it's just snakes hissing at each other for 8 minutes straight was like really hilarious. And I agree. And I literally could score it, but it just works so well to not have music and just make it this funny, long sequence.
It's an amazing, ambitious accomplishment to have all that storytelling with no dialogue or music
and music. Yeah. Cause I they could really rely on me to help tell that story because of no dialogue, but I totally agree with the decision. I think it's like really, really interesting. And then the other sort of funny thing about that episode is there's a piece of music that is important to the plot. It's only referred to as snake jazz in the animatic, and it's just snake. How would snakes make jazz if all they could really do was make snake sounds, right? So I'm tasked with coming up how to make snake jazz a real style of music, and it's a lot of carefully chosen snake sound effects and manipulating them in rhythmic and jazzy sort of ways. And one cool thing I can do with that is I can take a sound effect of a snake hiss or a rattle or something, and I can map it out on my keyboard so it's almost playable like an instrument. That's how I can give it kind of a melody or a jazzy feel, So
that's a tall order. I mean, have you had to do something like that before?
I have had to use sound effects as an instrument before. Nothing ever this absurd. I've had to create beats and grooves out of I did a commercial for Gateway Computers. This was a long time ago when Gateway still existed. The premise of the ad was it was all sound effects from a computer that were organized in the form of like a groove or a beat. So it was like the sound of the CD drive opening and like the hard drive spinning and clicking and all sorts of, I think we used modem sounds because people still used modems back then. And it was like to create this groove, right? I wasn't limited to just jazz. That one ended up being almost like a hip hop groove, but it could have been any sort of genre that I wanted, whatever felt natural. It just needed to be cool, right? This one has to be jazz though, because they refer to it as jazz. So like, what would a sentient planet of snakes play at a jazz club? That's what I have to figure out.
This is Carrie Kilpella. She's a character designer.
I did a lot of the Abraham Lincoln death scene with all of the post-Civil War snakes in the audience, and I did the 80s snakes that are like snorting coke and like riding around in Corvettes and with their spiked hair and like punk rocker looks or like super scrunchy hair.
Wow, so people who will go back to look at those episodes, what are things that people might want to look for?
That might be the most fun to like, where's Waldo? Like there's so many little secret hidden snakes through the whole thing.
What's your inspiration for some of those snakes? Do you reference stuff directly, or do you just do it out of your head?
Yeah, there's like a specific like General Rathbone snake and like Abraham Lincoln snake, and so all of those were like a specific type. And then we like looked up astronauts and like astronaut suits and I don't know 80s hair.
So is that just going on Google and
Yeah.
literally just
It's a lot of Google.
Google image search?
A lot of Pinterest, surprisingly. I didn't think I would be a big Pinterest fan,
Really?
but there's so many boards on there that are very useful.
Like what? Like what would be an example of that to somebody listening at home?
Oh, it's just like you could search anything in there, and whatever you click on kind of goes to another image that's slightly related or is on a board with it. And so it's a good place to like find a database of specific things that you're looking for and to build your own like inspiration boards for it.
Yeah.
So we're on there a lot and on Google a lot. It's funny because like during the day we're like Googling animal autopsies and like what gangrene looks like and what it looks like to be like frozen and have hypothermia and like all of these disgusting things, tryptophobia. So like all day on our screens is just like these really vulgar things that I feel like in any other office we'd get in trouble for. But here it's just like normal.
My name's James Mcdermott, and I'm the art director on season 4 for Rick and Morty.
You probably know better than anybody else all the sort of callbacks and references. Things that maybe the casual observer might not notice.
I mean, you know, we were trying to reference the Mercury astronauts as far as like the snake suit and everything for the astronaut, for the snake astronaut. And Hitler's apartment was interesting.
Hitler's apartment?
Yeah,
Why?
the snake Hitler. I was just trying to find like where, you know, the famous speech and trying to figure out exactly like what that looked like and having a deep dive through that just to try to find like the right details for like the bathroom and the inner little smoking room that he has. And
So that's based on actual Hitler
yeah,
conditions.
yeah.
And are you the one who goes to find all that?
Yeah, well, pulled a ton of reference. And
Wow.
Trying to, you know, I mean, it's like, it's sort of vaguely looks like it. We're obviously doing our own touches on it to make it feel more snake-like, and everything had to be filled with S's. We couldn't spell anything, which was really fucking annoying.
What do you mean?
Meaning, like, if there's names in the background, or like we're really normally you can, sort of telegraph something through storefront name or something if there's something important to say, or in whatever fashion. And this, they wanted no English. It all had to be S's. So like every single thing that normally would have English on it somewhere in order to help tell the story, everything had to be in S's, which was like crazy annoying. But in the end, it's really, it worked really well. And the crazy thing is like the snakes talk, like basically don't talk for 8 minutes, and you understand what's going on. That was amazing.
That's amazing.
That's what was incredible about this episode.
8 minutes?
At least.
Wow.
I think it was longer before, and then it got cut down. It might be less than 8 minutes now, but it was even longer before, and it still played, and it still was intriguing and interesting to watch.
It started with dialogue, and that went away. Do you know why?
I think because they wanted to see if they could get away with it, and just to see. And then when they played it in the animatic, everyone laughed their head off, and they were like, "Oh my God, we actually understand what they're trying to say or do in the scenes without actually, understanding the language or whatever." So, I think it was more like, "Can we do this?"
Yeah.
And they, brave enough to ask the question, and it worked.
This is lead background designer Robbie Irwin.
The Snakes episode was another challenge because we had to not only design a new world, but there was a lot of scale changes within that episode because you have snakes that evolved instead of humans. So the challenge there is trying to make something feel relatable to the viewer, but also feel like for snakes. And
So like Snake New York City.
yeah, Snake New York City, Snake Pentagon, Snake Hitler, and Snake Germany, and then all the way back and forward to the future where you have like the revisioned or revisited idea of like a futuristic Terminator snake kind of idea. And so it's a combination of all those different eras. And I think initially we started off with like 60s architecture for when we first encountered their world altogether. But I think we kind of swayed away from that. But that was the hardest challenge for that one, was just getting scale right.
Getting scale.
Yeah.
Instead of human snakes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a weird challenge.
Yeah. And figuring out how they might drive. How the helicopters.
How did you land on that? I don't recall.
Yeah. It was we went through several versions of the cars that they ride in. It was kind of they started off a little too cartoony, but then we got to this sensibility with it to where it kind of felt like we could relate to those shapes, and it didn't feel too much like us trying to imitate. That's a weird problem, isn't it? But like trying to imitate what a cartoon snake what the world would be like. So I think in one sequence we had there's like an MIT with a bunch of in the 80s with a bunch of snakes outside breakdancing and stuff like that, and then there was a another sequence where we kind of go into a 7-Eleven type store and there's a lottery ticket stand and all that.
So you've got to reconsider the physical world and completely reinterpret it.
All together, like how they would hold a phone, how they would hold a gun. Simple things we take for granted. We have to redesign it to make it feel like it's within their world.
And you don't want it to be wacky cartoony.
Right.
You want it to be serious.
Yeah, serious to an extent.
Straight.
Yep. But there's a careful balance there too, because it has to look realistic and relatable, but it can't be too cartoony. It's like you're riding this fine edge in design of being within our world, not too cartoony, but not too realistic at the same time. Because there's a simplicity to the design of Rick and Morty, to where if you were to just trace a picture of a laptop or a computer device, then you've taken this too far out. It has to be simplified and made a little ugly, not only to go along with the comedy, but to go along with the design sense of the show.
So you sort of diminish it.
Yeah, diminish it, characterize it, and break it down to its like basic core element, and then go from there.
Here's dialogue editor Nick Rachinski.
Snakes is my favorite.
Your favorite?
Oh yeah. Snakes was cool, and I know I said I was a dialogue editor, but my favorite part of Snakes is the sequence where Morty drops the snake onto the snake planet. He drops the dead snake out of the ship. And so the challenge there was instead of dialogue editing, it was, okay, we have to build this entire 2-minute long sequence that's, it's tropes. It's like Apollo 13 meets some other space movie meets Armageddon. It's all this meets Indiana Jones. There's so much going on, and we had to sell it without any dialogue, and we weren't sure if it was going to play, if it was going to be clear. And again, it speaks to the great directing we have in storyboards. But Lee, the lead editor, and I got together and we sound designed out that entire montage just for temp. Like, it'll change when it goes to mix, but we wanted everything to be super clear for the storyboard artists, so that when their boards got brought back in, sunk up to audio, and Dan and Justin saw it, they would be like, this works. Like, it totally scans. Everyone is going to get what's happening. Like, the snake falls. The kids are watching the snake fall out of the sky. The news broadcasts are happening about the snakes. The military is reacting. There's government press conferences. They hijack this professor who's an expert on ancient alien snake language to come in and communicate with this snake. So seeing that come together was awesome. And then obviously the snake time travel stuff is hilarious. And Jerry's B story in that episode is really beautiful.
Subscribe to the Adult Swim podcast in your podcast app, and you'll hear directly from the people behind some of your favorite Adult Swim shows. Send your requests, comments, or criticisms, or whatever, to adultswimpodcast@gmail.com. Hear the sounds of the multiverse with the Rick and Morty soundtrack available now. The album features fan favorites like Get Swifty and Alien Jazz Rap, original scores from composer Ryan Elder, as well as new songs from Clipping and Chad Van Galen. The Rick and Morty soundtrack is on sale in the Sub Pop Mega Mart now, or available on all streaming platforms. Thanks to Jacob, James, Ryan, the other James, Robbie, Nick, and Carrie for chatting with me. Thanks to Dave Bonowitz for editing this, and to Christina Loringer for her help. Special thanks to Steve Levy for wrangling all these folks, and thank you for listening.